Hello, and welcome to a very special episode of the Art of Product podcast. I'm your usual host, Derek, and today I am joined by a special guest where together we will, announce the news that StaticKit has been acquired. I am joined today by Cole Krumholtz, the founder of FormSpree and the one who acquired StaticKit. Welcome, Cole.
Hi, how's it going?
Pretty good. Thanks for coming on the show. I thought it'd be fun to talk a little bit about, the acquisition, of course, but also dive into your story a little bit. You are also a bootstrapper. You've co-founded a number of other companies over the years. The cool thing is, you and I have gotten to know each other through this process, but I actually don't know a ton about your background, so it'll be new to me as well.
I think it's pretty exciting. I am a longtime fan of the show, so it's pretty cool to be here.
Cool. Awesome. To kick us off, how did you get your start into this whole funky bootstrapped SaaS world? Did you start out as a software developer or a designer? And what kind of inspired you to get into the industry, I guess?
I started off as a software developer. I got my degree in computer science a long time ago. I think when I started working in industry and working for, my first job was for like a multi-thousand person company. I pretty early found out that I didn't really like that culture and sort of always wanted to branch off and do my own thing. I got lucky at some point. I had been working on side projects and I kind of started working on this game company. I got some funding. I moved out to San Francisco and was just trying to build products, doing the sort of classic startup VC sort of approach. At some point, I started focusing on developer tools and I ended up launching, I think, a dozen or so APIs and different products around, I would say, the pre-Jamstack sort of static site, single page app kind of movement. I don't know if you remember Backbone.js, but I actually launched a company called Backlift, which was specifically like a platform as a service for single page Backbone.js apps, which was a bad idea.
Well, it's crazy to look back on how much that landscape has changed. I mean, other things like the back end, I feel like hasn't changed nearly as rapidly. Like Rails has been around for 18 years now or something.
Right. Yeah.
And people are still using it, but you think about, technologies in the front end space and it's like, my gosh, you mentioned Backbone and you instantly date yourself, but I was there too,
Yeah. Yeah. It was interesting. It was definitely interesting trying to build products for that community. I think one of the main things that I learned during that phase is that there's not a single persona for a developer. I mean, I think there's a spectrum for sure of people who are right on the cutting edge and working with these, libraries, the MVC libraries at the time, which sort of went from, Backbone and Angular and eventually React. And then there's a bunch of people who they're more focused on the HTML and CSS. And then there are people who are hobbyists trying to get stuff done, or, marketers or other professionals that use code in whatever capacity. And they're all developers in a sense, and many of them identify as developers. It's interesting trying to pick a product for a developer without sort of focusing on what kind.
That's kind of what I found too. I mean, in building StaticKit, we probably had some overlap for sure in the types of customer that would maybe use FormSpree or use StaticKit, but I was definitely focusing a lot on React developers and the ones kind of adopting newer sets of technologies. And while those are gaining popularity and definitely a big factor in the world of front end development and static sites and stuff, there's just a whole nother world of people who are using, Jekyll or no static site generator at all and just flat HTML files. And it's just, I found that there's a huge variety of different quote unquote developers, right, in this space.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess to try and get to how I got here, I built a lot of tools. Not a lot of them succeeded. We had some success with this Brace.io product that I launched around 2013, I think, which was sort of a static site hosting tool. But at that point, I'd been in Silicon Valley for 5 years, and I was basically a solo founder for a lot of that, and it was just getting tiring to sort of be building my own stuff and not really having a team around me or having I felt like I wasn't really having the impact that I wanted to have. And so I ended up kind of reaching out and finding ways to sort of end that phase of my career, I guess. I thought at that point, like I would never come back to startups, that was it for me for being a founder. I got a great acqui-hire deal with Squarespace, and I was working there for 3.5 years. In that transition, I kind of made a deal with Anthony that 3 tools that had been a part of Brace, FormSpree, ChartSpree, and GridSpree, which were all sort of like little static site dynamic tools, that those could be open sourced, and that I could kind of work on them, a couple hours a week on the side. So I did that, and FormSpree continued to grow, and there was a couple of key contributors that work with me to sort of launch a paid product and to continue to sort of build and maintain that. And over the 3.5 years that I was at Squarespace, FormSpree just consistently doubled pretty much every year, to the point where I was like, this is something I should be focusing on. So I kind of feel like I didn't really set out to be a bootstrap founder. I think it just kind of found me. FormSpree sort of pulled me into this world.
So this came out of Brace then.
Yeah.
And was Brace was it a venture-backed startup then that then was acqui-hired, or?
It's complicated. I mean, it was,
Yeah.
I did YC, and so I had some funding from YC, and during that time, YC was giving out $150K, and I was a solo founder, so I had a lot of time to sort of try different ideas. And I think Brace was one of the more successful ones, but I never got a full seed round or anything like that.
And so this was part of that tool set. And when you joined Squarespace, they kind of, wanted your talent to work on the Squarespace product, and didn't necessarily like take the products that you had built previously and fold them into Squarespace, right? So
Yeah.
that's where you could kind of just continue working on them in an open source fashion.
That's right.
Interesting. Huh. Well, that's cool that that was permissible. I know like a lot of people who could kind of go through an acquisition and kind of lose their passion for this stuff that they're working on in their new day job. So I take it that was probably a good outlet for you to have while also doing the corporate thing for a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, but I'll be honest, I really wasn't paying attention.
Yeah.
I mean, the team that ended up sort of being the main contributors and turned into my co-founders when I left and we formed a company, they were the main driving force behind it for those years while I was at Squarespace. And they also were working on it part-time. It really started off with just like a team of folks that were all kind of involved in other projects and were contributing to it. But it takes time. It takes time it depends, obviously. But in this case, it took us, several years to see the community and the user base grow to the point where it could sustain us.
Interesting. So you're working on this as an open source project, and were there people basically attracted to the project and wanting to use it, but didn't want to go through the hassle of spinning up their own server to run it themselves, and were kind of like asking for a hosted version of it? Is that kind of how the impetus for like turning it into a SaaS product came about?
I think we always thought that, that would be true. I mean, I didn't see people being like, hey, I wish this thing was just, we basically had a hosted version of it from the start. So people were using that. I mean, I think it was just an experiment. We just like tried charging for it. We said, here's some additional features you can unlock if you pay for it. And people did that, despite the fact that it also was open source. And we had, we had instructions on how to deploy it onto Heroku yourself. People just didn't want to hassle with that.
Now, I do see a lot of other companies, or have seen over the years, a lot of companies trying to like take this approach of like, some call it like the open core model, or just kind of open source as marketing. You see large examples like GitLab doing this, right? And smaller examples, I think Fathom Analytics for a while was an open source project that also had a paid tier, and I think they've since kind of wound that down. And you also kind of wound down the maintaining the open source version of the product. So like, do you feel like it was successful? Would you recommend experimenting with that, or kind of what was your takeaway from like trying to use that as a marketing channel, I guess?
I think it's kind of a mixed bag. I mean, I think in our case, it's hard to say what the actual impact of it being open source was. I mean, I feel like, in the early days, it was kind of our only choice. So we weren't doing it because we thought there would be a big marketing upside. I think at first, people loved the product. We got a lot of mentions and word of mouth sharing, partly because it was sort of the first, I think the first service that sort of took this approach around static sites and forms. But I'm not sure if it's because we were open source or because we were free or because we were new that sort of drove that initial excitement and word of mouth. But I do know that like that reputation of being free and open source was sort of something that we had to fight against. If you saw a lineup of form service providers, later around 2018, we would be in that lineup as the sort of budget pick kind of. That's clearly not what we wanted our brand to be, especially since we were investing so much in our infrastructure and building out, we were building out these native plugins and just trying to create this very streamlined experience where it was super easy to add, additional functionality to your form. So we were fighting against that perception. I think the other thing that we had to fight against were competitors. Some examples of competitors just like took our code and didn't change fonts and didn't change, much, and were able to compete with us. But I think the main competitor was really ourselves. We had our own open source product, and when we tried to add features or, appeal to bigger customers and put an appropriate price tag on that, there was always that competing option that they could fork our code base and sort of do it themselves. We just decided that wasn't sustainable, and we needed to go back to the closed source model.
I kind of did something similar with Level back when I was building out a couple of years ago, and I did find that there was definitely some marketing benefit at least in awareness, right? It just the fact that it's an open source code base kind of made it novel inherently and attracted people to it a bit. But I also learned quickly that it's a whole nother thing to like maintain this community version. Like you have to think so much about like, well, is the deployment experience still smooth and working well? And people are filing feature requests in GitHub issues, right? And like, or submitting pull requests, and you're like, I don't know if this is really on the roadmap. I don't know if I really want to merge this, but it's like kind of, to me, made it really clear that like open source projects are kind of their own beast, where community wants to take ownership of it in a sense, especially if it's a successful one, right? Then you have people wanting to actively contribute, and that's great for like, things like frameworks like Rails, where the community can really come to a consensus about what's important to them and build it. But oftentimes I feel like that the desires of an open source community doesn't necessarily align with like building a commercial product that you're monetizing, and you're figuring out strategy in that respect. So you touched on competition a little bit. I mean, and you guys were very early into this like whole form backend as a service category, I guess. But as static sites have gotten more popular, I was one of them, right? I was one of those competitors, and there's a bunch of other ones. And what I discovered is like a whole range of, kind of built in a weekend type of competitors. It seems like on the surface, a pretty simple type of thing to build. And then of course, once you get into it, you learn just how many considerations there are, spam being a big one of them, right?
Yeah. Did you run into that?
A little bit, but not, I don't know if StaticKit got to the scale where like it was really in the crosshairs of spam bots,
Yeah.
We do have some protections in place to kind of intelligently look for that. And I think it's based on kind of my analysis of traffic and submissions. It seems to be doing pretty well, but I know that I would have to get a lot more sophisticated if the product grew a lot more, and I'm sure you guys have had to deal with that, right?
For sure. Yeah. It's like, it's a huge part of our technology is about how we deal with that. It also kind of shaped, I think, our company and our product early on. I mean, from the very beginning, I think we were very easy to sort of target. And I think we've tried to sort of, look at the surface area of the product and really button up every possible vector that somebody could use, to basically use us as a tool for spam. And sometimes that has been frustrating to our users. They got to fill out these CAPTCHAs, and they got to, even starting an account, you've got to, you sign in, you get an email that's got a CAPTCHA on it. So we're doing as much as we can to sort of keep the traffic, the spam traffic minimal.
That's a thankless chunk of work, I feel like, too, because it's not necessarily a selling point to people. I mean, if the customer is sophisticated enough to understand that, like, no, spam is actually a major problem on a service like this, and also on a service like Drip that I ran the technical side of for years, I had to deal with my fair share of, just doing war with spammers, basically. But it's like, customers just expect that, like, I expect your service not to have spam issues, so just do what it takes to make that be. And that's actually represents a huge body of work.
Yeah.
So, and one of my perceptions has been, because there's so many people trying to compete in this space, and I think naively just like slapping a price tag on their service that's maybe, half of what the going rate for the well-established services are, I imagine it can be quite frustrating to see that and have to just deal with that noise. I mean, so what has your approach been over these years to, like, do you just ignore the competition? Do you keep an eye on what people are doing and saying, and how do you, like, not let it derail you, I guess?
If the question is like, how do you keep competitors from becoming a distraction, I would say step one is don't start another form company. I think you're going to have some of that distraction regardless in this industry or this space or whatever you want to call it. I think generally when it comes to, like, competition, I don't think it necessarily helps to ignore it. Like, I think it's all about picking the competition that you want to focus on. You can pick competitors and spend your time worrying about them. And if you pick ones that are kind of the smaller ones that, that in a way aren't really changing the field, you're kind of going to be lowering your vision, your sort of target, what you're focusing on. But if you pick, competitors that are sort of bigger players and that helps you motivate you to sort of continue to compete at a higher level, I think that can be constructive.
Yeah, you guys have been around for a while, and you guys don't disclose your revenue numbers publicly, but I think it's, like, fair to say that you are profitable. You're able to work on this full time, and at your scale, you're at a comfortable level of revenue where it's like you guys are in default alive state for sure, and can be in it for the long haul. You and I have also had conversations about, like, how you define success. I think you had mentioned something to me of, like, well, I don't think we're successful yet. You're a bootstrapper, and I think most of us understand the feeling that, like, it is not moving fast enough, or it took way longer than I was expecting it to. But, like, how do you think about that? How do you define success?
Yeah, I mean, I think it totally depends on your frame of reference. I feel like when I said we're not successful yet, I'm kind of speaking from the perspective of, like, my old, goals going out to San Francisco and kind of being in that milieu or whatever. The luxury of a bootstrap company is that you get to choose what success is. And I've seen FormSpree as sort of an extension of my career. And so I've evaluated my success there as, in sort of career framing. So, like, am I growing as an engineer, as a leader? Am I learning? Am I making a reasonable, amount of compensation? Is there good room for that to grow? Can I support the lifestyle that I'm interested in? I think for me, using those metrics, I feel like we are successful already. And that's what makes it sustainable, is that, we're not depending on, the next thing to break in our favor for us to be happy. We're comfortable right now, and that allows us to sort of think longer term, and it allows us to sort of continue to not, stress in some ways that I think, if you're trying to meet 30-40% month over month growth goals, or those other things that you end up having to do if you're depending on investors, it really changes your expectations. And I guess the other thing that makes it successful is that I just love this work. Like, I love being the CEO of a bootstrap, relatively small team. I think it just gives me like kind of like this super interesting access to so many other different facets of building a company. I mean, I get to kind of think at a strategic level. I get to problem solve at a tactical level. You know, I get to like try these different fields that I'm obviously not good at, and then realize that I need to hire somebody who's going to be way better at it. And then I get to see them excel and be way better than me, and sort of in a way just like live vicariously through other people that I get to work with. I'm a former naval officer. I joined the Navy after college to see the world or whatever. And I feel like being a founder of a company in a way is sort of like the most adventure that I can have while still sitting behind a laptop.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah. I like that. Yeah. So you bought StaticKit.
Indeed.
Why? And what's your vision for like for the next, I guess the next chapter of FormSpree? Yeah.
Well, first, I mean, I loved StaticKit when it launched. I really loved the vision of sort of, you know, the idea that there are a lot of sort of common, you know, dynamic tools or functions or components or whatever you want to call it that a lot of websites need, especially static websites. Back in the initial days of FormSpree, when I also had, you know, ChartSpree and GridSpree, which was basically like a Google Sheets backed sort of database thing. This idea of a set of tools around, you know, static sites or around this sort of Jamstack type sites resonates with me a lot. And I think the thing that scared me the most about StaticKit when it first came out was just how thoughtful the execution was and how the developer experience was really, you know, honing in on that specific, I guess, persona or workflow that I think a lot of developers prefer. So, and that was something that we just weren't able to focus on and hadn't been investing in at the time. To me, like I've always been a huge fan, and I see it as like a way of, you know, basically being able to offer a set of just like well-crafted, well thought through, already battle-tested tools to that side of the developer community. And in a way, it sort of like rounds out our offering. We have the HTML, you know, first workflow, the one that we kind of launched in 2013 or whatever. And we recently launched this thing called Form Button, which is more of a widget for, you know, people that don't even want to really, you know, I think it's like a very low code kind of approach. It's just a copy paste thing that you can make some adjustments to. And then this, on the other hand, is a very like full developer experience that fits in with a CLI kind of focused workflow that kind of gives us this like complete offering that can really satisfy kind of any developer's workflow. This is for us like, you know, a big step forward towards a general goal of being kind of the best form tool for, you know, any developer that wants to add a form to their website. That's kind of our goal.
I think anyone who's listened to this podcast has heard me talk enough about kind of the StaticKit journey and some of the highs and the lows and some of the struggles that I encountered in like trying to, you know, scale this quickly enough to become a viable business to support me and all that. But, you know, I definitely did see and continue to see a lot of interest in kind of the developer centric tooling. And so when you and I started talking, you know, you basically kind of shared your vision in the same way, and it sounded like you were, you know, thinking about it the right way. And so a big piece of this is bringing the kind of React library and the CLI and the way, you know, the version controlled way to kind of declaratively, you know, specify your form resources and stuff like that. All that now is becoming part of FormSpree, which is really, really awesome. And then you also have this battle tested backend that is prepared to you know, to deal with any spam that may come through and all that kind of stuff. So it just made sense. It just seemed like a good pairing, you know.
Yeah, and I think one of the really exciting things here is that, you know, we've been working on a set of these tools already, you know, the sort of plugins that we have, you know, Stripe, you know, Airtable, a lot of different tools that you can combine with a form to create, you know, that sort of dynamic functionality that's a part of every website. I see an opportunity here where we can basically just really take your idea and run with it and add a lot more of these sort of functions, plugins, actions to expand the capabilities of a form using that workflow that I think you've really honed. So I think the next few months are going to be super exciting because we can really take this workflow and make it a lot more capable.
That's pretty awesome. The Jamstack, is kind of a newer concept that Netlify coined, after you guys were already kind of in this Jamstack ecosystem before it was called that, right? But I mean, there's a lot of effort and venture capital dollars, kind of behind this movement of like static sites, static pre-generation as the scalable way to build websites. Do you see this like becoming a bigger trend, over the next 5-10 years? Like, do you think this will be a strong alternative to WordPress and kind of the more monolithic, content management system driven way of building websites? Or like, kind of what's your, if you're looking out into the future, what do you see?
I think it's here, and I think we are excited about this space because it's already built a fair amount of traction and has, I think, a dedicated community of developers that really love this workflow, and it has a ton of real tangible benefits to it. I don't really want to weigh in on the like Jamstack versus sort of LAMP stack kind of idea, but I feel like it's not going anywhere for sure. And to me, we're kind of more interested in building tools that meet developers where they are and sort of provide them with the best workflow we can given what they're doing. And so I guess I'm less concerned really about like whether Jamstack is going to win or whatever, and more just like, is this a growth area? And I definitely believe that. You look at like Vercel and you look at, what Netlify is doing, and these are companies that have really done an incredible job of making, the developer experience magic in a lot of ways. And that's also what we're kind of drawn to is to kind of be a part of creating magical experiences for developers, but not too much magic.
Yeah. Just the right amount.
Yeah.
Just the right amount.
Just a bit of magic.
That's good. That's good. Well, awesome, man. Yeah, I'm really excited to see, where you take it, and, to see StaticKit kind of reborn into, a different company, but the vision carried on. It'll be really awesome to see.
I'm very excited about the future, and I'm excited about the present too. I mean, it's a good time to be building developer tools.
Well, thanks so much for coming on, Cole. Where can people keep up with you if they want to follow along with the stuff you're working on?
Formspree.io is our homepage, and we're also on Twitter at Formspree. So you can check us out there. I don't know, I'm at Cole vs. Code, my Twitter handle, where I chronicle my battle with curly braces. But
there you go. Awesome. Well, thanks again, Cole. And the notes for the show can be found at artofproductpodcast.com. And we'll see you next time.
Cheers. Bye.